Spring arrived at Riverside Preparatory Academy with blooming flowers in the courtyard and warm sunshine streaming through the tall windows. Mrs. Hartwell was in the final stages of preparing for the spring concert, which was scheduled for the last Friday in April. She had selected the most challenging pieces for her students to perform, wanting to showcase the high level of musical education at Riverside. The concert would feature several solo performances by her top students, including a violin solo that would be the highlight of the evening. Mrs. Hartwell had chosen Amanda Richardson, a talented 10th grader whose parents had been paying for private violin lessons since she was 4 years old. Amanda played well and had won several regional competitions. She would be performing a demanding piece by Mozart that required technical precision and emotional maturity. Mrs. Hartwell spent extra time coaching Amanda for her solo performance. The music teacher wanted this concert to be her masterpiece, something that would be talked about for years to come. She imagined the standing ovation, the impressed looks on the faces of the music board representatives, and perhaps even a feature article in the local newspaper about the exceptional music program at Riverside. Maya knew nothing about the upcoming concert. She focused entirely on her own musical journey with Mrs. Chun. The elderly teacher had been introducing Maya to increasingly complex pieces, and the young girl was meeting every challenge with dedication and skill. Mrs. Chun often remarked that, in her 40 years of teaching, she had rarely encountered a student with such natural musicality, combined with such fierce determination. One afternoon in early April, Mrs. Chun made an announcement that surprised Maya. She told the girl that she had entered her in a regional youth music competition that would take place in 3 weeks. Maya was shocked. She had never performed in front of an audience before, and the idea of competing against other young musicians made her nervous. Mrs. Chun explained that she believed Maya was ready for this challenge. The competition would be good experience regardless of the outcome. She assured Maya that the piece they had been working on was perfect for the competition, and that Maya had the skills to perform it beautifully. Maya felt both excited and terrified. She told her father about the competition that evening, and Marcus immediately said he would find a way to take time off work to attend. He could see how important this was to his daughter, and he wanted to support her in every way possible. The competition was scheduled for the same day as Riverside Preparatory Academy's spring concert. Marcus didn't think much about the timing because he had no reason to care about the school concert. His only concern was being there for Maya at her competition. Maya practiced even more intensely in the weeks leading up to the competition. Her fingers flew across the strings with increasing confidence, and her bowing became smoother and more controlled. Mrs. Chen was pleased with her progress and felt certain that Maya would make a strong showing at the competition. At Riverside Preparatory Academy, preparations for the spring concert continued. Mrs. Hartwell was becoming increasingly stressed as the date approached. She snapped at students who made small mistakes and spent hours agonizing over every detail of the performance. She wanted everything to be absolutely flawless. 3 days before the concert, disaster struck. Amanda Richardson fell during a soccer game and broke her wrist. She would be unable to perform the violin solo that was meant to be the centerpiece of the entire concert. Mrs. Hartwell was devastated when she received the news. She immediately began searching for a replacement, but none of her other students were prepared to perform such a difficult solo piece on such short notice. The music teacher considered canceling the solo portion of the concert, but that would look terrible in front of the music board representatives and other important guests. She spent 2 sleepless nights trying to find a solution, calling former students and contacting musicians from the community symphony. But no one was available or willing to perform with so little notice. Mrs. Hartwell was in her office, surrounded by sheet music and feeling completely defeated, when she heard violin music drifting through the hallway. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, filled with emotion and technical skill. She recognized the piece immediately. It was the same Mozart composition that Amanda was supposed to perform at the concert. The music teacher rushed out of her office and followed the sound. She couldn't imagine who might be playing at this time of day. Most students had already gone home, and there were no scheduled practice sessions. As she got closer to the practice rooms, the music became clearer and more impressive. Whoever was playing had extraordinary talent. Mrs. Hartwell approached the practice room slowly and looked through the small window in the door. What she saw made her stop breathing for a moment. Maya was standing in the room, completely absorbed in her performance. The janitor's daughter was playing the Mozart piece with a level of skill and artistry that exceeded anything Mrs. Hartwell had heard from her own students. The music teacher stood frozen, unable to process what she was witnessing. This was the same girl she had scolded months ago for touching a school violin. The same girl she had told to focus on realistic goals and forget about music. But here she was, playing with a maturity and depth of feeling that belied her age and circumstances. Maya finished the piece and lowered her violin. She was practicing in one of the back practice rooms, thinking no one would notice her. After months of staying away from the music wing, she had decided to use one of the rooms just this once to practice for her upcoming competition. The acoustics were better than in her apartment, and she wanted to hear how the piece would sound in a proper performance space. Mrs. Hartwell opened the door, and Maya jumped in surprise. The girl's face went pale as she recognized the music teacher who had humiliated her months earlier. She immediately started to apologize for using the practice room without permission, but Mrs. Hartwell held up her hand to silence her. The music teacher's mind was racing. She had just witnessed something remarkable, and she was struggling to reconcile what she had seen with her previous assumptions about Maya. But more than that, Mrs. Hartwell saw a solution to her immediate problem. Here was a violinist who could perform the Mozart piece beautifully, saving her precious spring concert from disaster. Mrs. Hartwell asked Maya where she had learned to play like that. Maya explained about Mrs. Chun, the lessons twice a week, and the hours of daily practice. She mentioned the violin her father had bought her from the pawn shop and how she had been preparing for a youth music competition. The music teacher listened carefully, formulating a plan. She told Maya that there had been an emergency with the student who was supposed to perform the violin solo at the spring concert. She said the concert was very important with distinguished guests attending, and she needed someone who could perform the Mozart piece. Would Maya be willing to step in and save the concert? Maya was stunned by the request. After the way Mrs. Hartwell had treated her before, she couldn't believe the music teacher was asking for her help. She also felt uncomfortable with the idea of performing at Riverside Preparatory Academy, a school where she didn't belong and where she had been made to feel unwelcome, but Mrs. Hartwell was persuasive. She appealed to Maya's love of music, suggesting that this would be an incredible opportunity to perform on a real stage in front of a sophisticated audience. She promised Maya that she would receive proper credit in the program, and that it would be a wonderful experience. Maya thought about it carefully. Part of her wanted to refuse, to tell Mrs. Hartwell exactly how those harsh words had made her feel months ago. But another part of her was tempted by the opportunity. She did love performing, and the idea of playing on a real stage was appealing. Finally, she told Mrs. Hartwell that she would think about it and give her answer the next day. That evening, Maya discussed the situation with her father. Marcus was immediately suspicious of Mrs. Hartwell's motives. He didn't like the idea of the music teacher using his daughter to solve her own problem, especially after the way she had treated Maya before. He told his daughter that the decision was entirely hers, but she should think carefully about why Mrs. Hartwell was suddenly being so friendly. Maya also talked to Mrs. Chen about the invitation. The elderly teacher had a different perspective. She told Maya that performing was an important part of being a musician, and that experience on stage was valuable regardless of the circumstances. However, she also reminded Maya about the youth competition that was scheduled for the same day. Maya would have to choose between the two events. Maya spent the night thinking about what to do. The competition meant a lot to her because Mrs. Chun had worked so hard to prepare her for it. But the concert at Riverside would be on a bigger stage with a more prestigious audience. She also couldn't deny that part of her wanted to show Mrs. Hartwell and everyone else at that fancy school what she was capable of. The next morning, Maya told Mrs. Hartwell that she would perform at the spring concert, but only under certain conditions. She wanted her father to be allowed to sit in the audience, and she wanted to use her own violin rather than one of the school's instruments. She also wanted Mrs. Chun to be invited as her guest. Mrs. Hartwell quickly agreed to all of. The auditorium filled quickly as parents, teachers, donors, and special guests arrived for the spring concert. The audience was dressed in elegant gowns and expensive suits, jewelry glinting under the chandelier lights. Conversations buzzed through the room as people found their seats and reviewed their programs. The representatives from the State Music Education Board sat in the front row. Along with scouts from two prestigious youth orchestras, Marcus felt out of place in his simple church clothes, but he held his head high as he sat in his reserved seat. He was here for his daughter, and nothing else mattered. Mrs. Chun sat beside him, her weathered hands folded calmly in her lap. She appeared serene, but inside she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness for her student backstage. Maya went through her warm-up routine one final time. She played scales slowly, listening carefully to ensure each note was perfectly in tune. Her hands were steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. She thought about all the hours she had practiced, all the encouragement Mrs. Chun had given her, and all the sacrifices her father had made so she could pursue this dream. Mrs. Hartwell was rushing around backstage, making final adjustments to the program order and giving last-minute instructions to students. She kept glancing at Maya with an expression that mixed hope and anxiety. The music teacher knew that her reputation was riding on this evening, and specifically on the violin solo that would be the centerpiece of the entire concert. The lights in the auditorium dimmed, and a hush fell over the audience. Mrs. Hartwell walked onto the stage to polite applause. She smiled graciously and welcomed everyone to the Riverside Preparatory Academy Spring Concert. She spoke about the importance of music education and thanked the special guests for attending. Then she introduced the first performers, and the concert began. The evening progressed through various musical selections. There were choir performances, a piano duet, a woodwind ensemble, and several other acts. The students performed well, and the audience applauded enthusiastically after each piece. Everything was going according to plan. Finally, after the intermission, Mrs. Hartwell returned to the stage to introduce the violin solo. She had carefully crafted her introduction to make it sound like she had discovered a rare talent and was generously providing a platform for this unknown musician. She spoke about the beauty of classical music and the dedication required to master a challenging piece like Mozart. Then Mrs. Hartwell made her announcement. She explained that due to an unfortunate injury, the originally scheduled performer could not participate. However, she said with a smile, they were fortunate to have found a remarkable young violinist who would perform in her place. She gestured toward the wings of the stage and invited Maya Williams to come forward. There was a moment of confused murmuring in the audience as Maya walked onto the stage. Many people recognized her as the janitor's daughter, the quiet girl who waited in the library after school. Some of the Riverside students exchanged surprised glances. A few teachers leaned forward in their seats with interest, while others sat back with skeptical expressions. Mrs. Hartwell's smile remained fixed on her face, but her eyes showed a flicker of discomfort as she realized how many people in the audience knew exactly who Maya was. This wasn't quite the narrative she had wanted to present. She had hoped to introduce Maya as simply a talented young musician. Without everyone knowing that she was the daughter of the school's janitor, Maya walked to the center of the stage, her old pawnshop violin and its taped-together case looking shabby under the bright lights. She wore her simple black dress with dignity, her head held high. She could see her father in the third row, his face glowing with pride and love. Next to him, Mrs. Chun nodded encouragingly. Maya positioned herself at the microphone stand and lifted her violin to her shoulder. For a moment, she looked out at the sea of faces staring back at her. She saw curiosity, skepticism, and in some cases barely concealed judgment. She recognized some of the teachers who had always been kind to her, and others who had looked right through her as if she didn't exist. Then Maya closed her eyes and focused only on the music. She took a deep breath, lifted her bow, and began to play. The first notes of the Mozart piece floated through the auditorium, pure and clear. Maya's fingers moved across the strings with practiced confidence, each note perfectly placed. Her bowing was smooth and controlled, drawing rich tones from her modest instrument that filled the entire space. The skeptical expressions in the audience began to change. People who had been sitting back in their chairs leaned forward. Conversations stopped completely as everyone focused on the music. Even those who knew nothing about violin technique could tell they were witnessing something special. Maya poured everything she had into the performance. All the months of practice, all the hours spent teaching herself before she met Mrs. Chun, all the determination she had developed after Mrs. Hartwell's cruel words, all the love and support from her father flowed through her fingers. And into the music, the piece was technically demanding, with rapid passages that required precise finger work and long sustained notes that tested breath control and bow technique. Maya executed every passage beautifully. But more than just technical skill, her performance had something that couldn't be taught in any lesson. She played with genuine emotion and deep understanding of the music. Marcus watched his daughter with tears streaming down his face. He had known she was talented, but seeing her perform on stage in front of hundreds of people took his breath away. All those early mornings when she practiced before school, all those evenings spent with Mrs. Chun, all the sacrifice had been worth it for this moment. Mrs. Chun watched with the professional eye of an experienced musician. She observed Maya's technique, noting how the girl had internalized all the lessons and made them her own. But more importantly, she saw that Maya had that rare quality that separated good musicians from truly great ones. She played from her soul, not just from her fingers. In the audience, people were mesmerized. The representatives from the Music Education Board exchanged meaningful glances. The youth orchestra scouts pulled out notebooks and began writing observations. Parents who had never spoken to Maya, or even noticed her existence, were now completely captivated by her performance. Mrs. Hartwell stood in the wings, watching with a complicated mix of emotions. She was relieved that the performance was going so well, which meant her concert would be a success. But she was also feeling something else, something uncomfortable that she didn't want to acknowledge. She was remembering the day she had found Maya playing in the practice room months ago, remembering the harsh words she had spoken, remembering how she had dismissed this girl's dreams and talents without a second thought. Maya moved into the final section of the piece, where the music built to an emotional climax before resolving into a gentle conclusion. Her bow danced across the strings, drawing out every bit of beauty the composition had to offer. The old violin from the pawn shop sang in her hands, proving that great music could come from anywhere, not just from expensive instruments and privileged circumstances. As Maya played the final notes, the auditorium was completely silent. Even after she lowered her violin and bow, there was a moment of absolute stillness, as if the audience was collectively holding its breath. Then the silence shattered into thunderous applause. People jumped to their feet, giving Maya a standing ovation. The applause went on, filling the auditorium with sound. Maya stood on stage, overwhelmed by the response. She looked out at her father, who was clapping harder than anyone. His face wet with tears. Mrs. Chun was also standing, applauding with a proud smile on her face. The representatives from the Music Education Board were on their feet, applauding enthusiastically. The youth orchestra scouts were clapping while simultaneously writing notes. Even the wealthy parents who had looked down on Maya moments before were now applauding with genuine appreciation. Maya bowed graciously and walked off the stage, her heart pounding with exhilaration and relief. Mrs. Hartwell met her in the wings, and for the first time the music teacher seemed at a loss for words. She started to say something about the performance being adequate, but she couldn't finish the sentence. They both knew it had been far more than adequate. It had been extraordinary. The rest of the concert seemed anticlimactic after Maya's performance. The remaining acts were well executed, but nothing matched the emotional impact of what the audience had just witnessed. People whispered to each other during the other performances, asking who that remarkable young violinist was and where she had trained. When the concert ended, Mrs. Hartwell returned to the stage for closing remarks. She thanked everyone for coming and acknowledged the performers. When she mentioned Maya's name again, the applause was even louder than before. The music teacher's smile looked strained as she realized that her carefully planned concert was now going to be remembered primarily for the janitor's daughter's stunning performance. After the formal conclusion, the audience moved to the reception area for refreshments. Maya was immediately surrounded by people wanting to congratulate her. The representatives from the Music Education Board introduced themselves and asked about her training. When they learned that she had only been taking, Marcus Williams pushed his cleaning cart down the marble hallways of Riverside Preparatory Academy every weekday morning at exactly 6 o'clock. The wheels squeaked slightly as he moved from classroom to classroom, wiping down desks and emptying trash bins before the students arrived. He had worked at this prestigious school for 12 years, and in all that time, he had never missed a single day. His dark blue janitor's uniform was always pressed and clean, and he took pride in keeping every corner of the building spotless. Marcus lived in a small apartment on the other side of town with his 14-year-old daughter, Maya. His wife had passed away when Maya was just 3 years old, leaving him to raise their daughter alone. Money was always tight, but Marcus made sure Maya had everything she needed. He worked extra shifts on weekends and holidays, saving every penny he could for Maya's future. Maya was a quiet girl with intelligent eyes and a gentle smile. She attended the public middle school in their neighborhood, which was nothing like the fancy academy where her father worked. The classrooms there had old textbooks and crowded desks, and the music program had been cut years ago due to budget problems. But Maya didn't complain. She knew her father worked hard, and she was grateful for everything he provided. Every afternoon, Maya would walk to Riverside Preparatory Academy after her own school day ended. She would sit in the library or an empty classroom, doing her homework while waiting for her father to finish his evening shift. Marcus preferred having her there where he could keep an eye on her. Rather than leaving her home alone in their neighborhood, the teachers and staff at Riverside knew Maya well. Most of them were kind to her, offering her snacks from the teacher's lounge or helping her with difficult homework problems. But there were a few who looked down on her because of who her father was. They saw her worn sneakers and second-hand clothes, and they whispered to each other when she walked by. Mrs. Patricia Hartwell was the music teacher at Riverside Preparatory Academy, and she was particularly proud of her position. She had studied at prestigious conservatories and performed with several symphony orchestras before taking this teaching job. Her students came from wealthy families who could afford private lessons and expensive instruments. She often boasted about the awards her students won at competitions across the state. Mrs. Hartwell had noticed Maya sitting in the hallways or library many times, but she had never spoken to the girl. In her mind, Maya didn't belong at a school like Riverside, even if she was just waiting for her father. The music teacher believed that talent and refinement came from proper breeding and expensive training, not from people who cleaned toilets for a living. One Tuesday afternoon in October, Mrs. Hartwell was preparing for the annual autumn concert. This event was one of the most important nights of the school year, where parents and donors gathered to watch the students perform classical pieces. The auditorium would be decorated with flowers, and everyone would dress in formal attire. Mrs. Hartwell took great pride in organizing this concert, and she was determined to make it perfect. As she walked down the hallway carrying sheet music, she heard violin music coming from one of the empty practice rooms. The sound was beautiful and pure, each note played with precision and feeling. Mrs. Hartwell stopped in her tracks, surprised to hear someone practicing so well. None of her students had such advanced technique. She walked toward the practice room, curious to see which talented musician was playing. When she opened the door, Mrs. Hartwell's expression changed from curiosity to shock. Maya was standing in the small room, holding one of the school's violins. Her eyes were closed as she played, completely lost in the music. The melody flowed from the instrument like water, each phrase perfectly shaped and emotionally compelling. Mrs. Hartwell's shock quickly turned to anger. This was one of the school's expensive violins, and Maya had no permission to touch it. The music teacher's face turned red as she marched into the room. Maya opened her eyes and immediately stopped playing. Her face went pale as she saw Mrs. Hartwell standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. The music teacher snatched the violin from Maya's hands. Her voice was sharp and cold when she spoke. She demanded to know what Maya thought she was doing, touching school property without permission. Maya tried to explain that she had just wanted to try playing, that she had been teaching herself by watching videos online and practicing finger positions on a ruler at home. But Mrs. Hartwell didn't want to hear excuses. The music teacher told Maya that violin was a sophisticated instrument that required years of proper training and discipline. She said it wasn't a toy for children to play with whenever they felt like it. Her words were harsh and dismissive, making it clear that she believed Maya had no business even touching such an expensive instrument. Maya's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She apologized quietly and started to leave the practice room, but Mrs. Hartwell wasn't finished. She called Maya back and told her that she should focus on realistic goals, not impossible dreams. She suggested that Maya should concentrate on her studies so she could get a decent job someday, perhaps following in her father's footsteps. The words stung deeply. Maya loved her father and respected his work, but she also had dreams of her own. She had always been drawn to music, even though her family could never afford lessons or an instrument. She had spent countless hours watching free violin tutorials online, learning music theory from library books, and practicing fingering techniques on makeshift. INSTRUMENTS. Mrs. Hartwell locked the violin back in the storage cabinet and told Maya that practice rooms were only for enrolled students who were part of the music program. She made it clear that Maya was not welcome in this part of the building. Then the music teacher left, leaving Maya standing alone in the empty room. Maya walked slowly back to the library where she usually waited for her father. She tried to focus on her homework, but the words on the page were blurry through her tears. She felt ashamed and angry, not just for herself, but for her father who worked so hard to give her a better life. That evening, Marcus noticed that his daughter was unusually quiet as they walked to the bus stop together. He asked if something was wrong, but Maya just shook her head and said she was tired. She didn't want to tell her father what had happened because she knew it would hurt him. He was already working so hard and she didn't want to add to his worries, but Marcus knew his daughter well. He could tell when something was bothering her. Over the next few days, he noticed that Maya no longer waited in the library at school. Instead, she sat outside on the bench, even though the weather was getting colder. When he asked her about it, she made up excuses about needing fresh air or wanting to read in natural light. The truth was that Maya felt uncomfortable being inside the school building now. Every time she walked through those hallways, she worried about running into Mrs. Hartwell again. The music teacher's words echoed in her mind, making her question her own dreams and abilities. Maybe Mrs. Hartwell was right? Maybe music was only for rich kids with fancy lessons and expensive instruments. Maybe she should just accept her place and stop reaching for things that seemed impossible. Marcus continued his work at Riverside Preparatory Academy, unaware of what had happened between his daughter and the music teacher. He took pride in his job, making sure every classroom sparkled and every hallway was clean. He often worked late into the evening, long after most of the teachers and students had gone home. One night, Marcus was cleaning the music wing when he heard someone crying softly. He followed the sound to a practice room and found Maya sitting on the floor in the corner, her knees pulled up to her chest. His heart broke seeing his daughter so upset. Marcus sat down beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. He didn't pressure her to talk, just let her know that he was there. Finally, Maya told him everything that had happened with Mrs. Hartwell. She explained how she had been teaching herself to play violin, how the music teacher had caught her with the school's instrument, and all the harsh words that had been said. Marcus listened carefully, his jaw tightening as Maya described how Mrs. Hartwell had spoken to her. When Maya finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked his daughter a simple question. He wanted to know if she truly loved music and wanted to learn the violin. Maya nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. She said it was the thing she wanted most in the world. Marcus made a decision that night. He told Maya that if she was serious about learning violin, he would find a way to make it happen. He didn't care what Mrs. Hartwell or anyone else thought. His daughter had dreams, and he was going to help her achieve them, no matter what it took. The next morning, Marcus went to a pawn shop across town. He had been saving money for a new winter coat, but he decided that could wait. He asked the shop owner to show him the violins they had available. Most of them were damaged or low quality, but there was one that seemed decent. It was old and scratched, with a few repairs visible on the body. But when the shop owner tested it, the sound was clear and true. Marcus bought the violin, along with a bow that needed new rosin and a case that was held together with duct tape. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. That evening he presented the violin to Maya. She stared at it in disbelief, then threw her arms.